Well, hey folks, it's your old pal King Waspinator, and welcome back to Total Party Skills. This is going to be a little bit of a long one, so go ahead and hit like and subscribe and buckle in. Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition is now 10 years old, so I guess that means that we're kind of living in the period where there should be a 30th edition revised release schedule of World of Darkness games, I would think. And if they were to do such a thing, it would allow them to correct, I think, what is an essential mistake that was made with the 20th anniversary versions of the games. Now, I only have Werewolf the Apocalypse as a 20th anniversary version. Like these things cost an arm and a leg. I mean, they are somewhat worth it, in fact, that they're pretty nicely thick books with tons of information. But using it as a general gauge of what they've done with the other 20th anniversary editions, they, how best to put it, they do too much to just reset the status quo to the way it was back in the beginning. And I can understand the urge for that. I mean, like, what else would be the desire to go back to the original World of Darkness, if not you're trying to get that original combination of characters and such, that the second wave of Chronicles of Darkness games didn't really quite give you. Arguably, I feel, in my own opinion, Vampire the Requiem came the closest to doing what Vampire the Masquerade was doing, but Werewolf the Forsaken and Mage the Awakening both just never really sat well with me for whatever reason. Mage the Awakening, I just really couldn't see what there was to do. Mage the Ascension gave you this this backdrop of this war for reality with several clearly defined enemies that stand against their traditions, so that you have just plenty of points of conflict if you don't want to just do personal games just about the player characters' lives and their immediate contacts and allies and mentors and stuff. It just the Awakening was just kind of too navel gazing, and Werewolf the Forsaken had just basically just stripped Werewolf down to being nothing but Garu, Western Concordiate tribes versus a larger group of Black Spiral Dancer types, but without any of the war to save the world kind of backdrop. Maybe just a hint of it. Some of the very last, I had stopped playing games, but I was still kind of ongoing curious about what was going on, with the World of Darkness. And so when they put out the first 3 core Chronicles of Darkness books, I got them all and read them, even though I had no intention of playing them at any point when I had bought them. And only Requiem really seemed to pull it off at all. And there's things about it that just seemed lame, literally having a Dracula clan in place of the Tremere. Why not just do what the quote-unquote 5th edition of Vampire the Masquerade does, where he just gives you the classic original 7 clans as were, and all that. And extrapolating from how they've done Werewolf into the other ones, I'm assuming that Vampire is just kind of just resetting the status quo in their 20th anniversary version, and that Mage is doing the same, and Changeling is doing the same, and so on and so forth. And the reason why I think that actually bothers me is that and previously, the older games from the 90s and early 2000s, when they put out new editions, they carried forward the meta plot. They acknowledged the things that had gone on in the supplemental books in the years since the last edition had come out. So it was carrying the story forward towards its inevitable climactic ending. And by resetting the status quo the way that they have done, they seem to completely kind of just be ignoring the fact that the end times did come. There was the 10th sphere, of the different spheres of magic for Mage had been discovered, and Ascension, was on the horizon, and the worm really did break loose into the world, and the werewolves did have their final stand in the apocalypse, and the ancient blood gods, the antediluvians and Methuselahs, rose, from their ancient graves to feed upon all their childer and the event that is Gehenna and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like they should have owned that and have still incorporated that into the setting. Um, and there's ways to do that. And in fact, right off the bat, werewolf and mage give you like like a good out for how those events could have been kind of forgotten, and that you have both the effect of paradox in mage and the delirium for werewolf. Uh, and also, it's justified in a couple of source books. In that, in Geokai, when describing, the Eastern version of the werewolf setting, where the werewolves haven't murdered all the other, shapeshifters, and they all still, work together. They don't believe that the sixth age is the end of times. It's just the bottom of the wheel before it swings back up, and there's supposed to be 12 ages. And if there's anything past the 12th age, that's the question mark. So that the sixth age is not supposed to be the end. It's just going to be a period of darkness before you start to rise back up into the dawn. Kind of like, the cycle of the year and all that kind of shit. And the Geru in the mainstream, Werewolf the Apocalypse setting, they're arrogant and they make a lot of assumptions. They're the self-appointed guardians of Gaia, but, like, there's no guarantee that, like, Gaia actually endorses or wanted them to do any of this shit. So it's very likely, I would say, that the Hingeyokai, since they never broke that balance between themselves and the other shapeshifters, because they never had a war of rage, I would dare say that this possibly gives you a more accurate prophecy of how things are supposed to evolve over time in the setting. So there could have been an event where the worm there was the whole thing with the the anti-Helios, the red star, and the spirit world, and rage across the heavens all could have happened. You could say that, like, the worm did manifest, and we'll just go with New York City. Maybe destroyed a couple of buildings that used to be famous and are no longer there, shall we say. And then between the paradox of that occurring and a kind of a global delirium, because of, like a gigantic manifestation of, like, the totemic entity of destruction itself being made manifest on the world, kind of would maybe be like a shock, obviously, to the entire human mind view. And then you have things like in Mummy the Resurrection, it talks about, the web of faith that was built by ancient Egypt that emanates out, from the Middle East. Possibly kind of providing a section of the Earth's physical realm that might have been kind of protected from those sorts of energies being unleashed, and the fact that Anasazi talks about the fact that their totem spirit Ananasa is not really quite like the other major totem spirits that the other shapeshifters follow. That Ananasa is kind of a backup copy of the Weaver. And so if the triad were to destroy itself in some final climactic spasm, and the Weaver is destroyed because it's swallowed the worm, and the worm destroys itself, choking on to death, trying to, like, feast on the spirit of Gaia and the wild and all that kind of stuff, that could all happen, and it could all destroy itself, and for a moment, reality be gone. But because Ananasa's there, and that Ananasa's kind of already tied herself to other aspects of the triad, so that her and her followers kind of already represent that entire wheel, is there to kind of reset everything. Ananasa now becomes the Weaver and recreates the worm and recreates the wild. Perhaps Gaia becomes the wild now, and you can choose from a handful of entities that you could choose to be the new worm, perchance. It's kind of up to you. Obviously, this is all just me spitballing shit. It's not like White Wolf is knocking down my door to come write for them or help them design and coordinate their setting in any sort of way. So this is all just me spitballing my own opinions. But long story short, the apocalypse could happen, and between a paradox occurrence and just the delirium effect itself, humanity has forgotten that this happened and now thinks that those events in that September in the year 2001 in New York were not caused by this sort of cosmic, destructive force being unleashed upon the world in some, like, final apocalyptic end times manifestation of all of our worst nightmares of such a thing. And instead, we would just remember it as a terrorist attack, and some of the unfurling events have been misremembered, and that's why there's all these weird question marks to this day amongst some people about how they don't necessarily think that could have happened the way it's said to have happened, and all that kind of shit. Blah blah blah. You can play into that kind of conspiracy theory shit as part of the setting and justify it through the paradox / delirium effect that's kind of happened worldwide. You can even say that part of the reason why the revision of that memory included stuff about Saudi Arabian pilots could be kind of like a part of the paradox effect bouncing off the web of faith coming out of Egypt. Now, the thing with werewolf is that you can have all the werewolves die for the most part, and yet 20, 30 years later, they would start appearing again, because as long as the kinfolk weren't wiped out, they would eventually start producing new, werewolf kin. Plus, if not all the other shapeshifters joined them in that final battle, they would still be around. And so in some ways, it give a little 20-year breathing space where the other changing breeds can actually kind of solidify their power base, and maybe even kind of take over some of the spaces that werewolves used to occupy. And so new werewolves are going to have a bit more of a trouble of just kind of figuring out what the hell they are. The tribes are still there, but maybe only a few of them actually are operational, because I could see like the Silent Striders, because they're involved with the Web of Faith part of the world, surviving, and still like some of their, like not all of them had been there at Anthelios at the end. I could see that the Stargazers might still be around, because they are somewhat more tied in with the Hengeokai. Likewise, the Japanese branch of the Shadow Lords could still be around. The Bone Gnawers for sure, and the Glasswalkers, both being the citified urban type werewolves, I would think would still probably be around in some numbers. For sure, the Bone Gnawers. And, just for a Californian setting, like, Bone Gnawers have to be the #1 tribe there now, obviously. America in general, for that matter. It's pretty much the Bone Gnawers civilization. Red Talons, I could see maybe that the Red Talons survived, but that's just because, like, Gaia maybe, like, hurled them back so that not all of them were destroyed, because they all would have gone to go for the final battle. Maybe the children of Gaia. But a lot of the other tribes, like, their kinfolk are there, and so a character might be born to them, but there's probably no, like, older adult Fianna or Silverfangs or Geta Fenris or Black Furies or Wendigo to be found to tell you what it is to be one of these things. And so your characters are going to have to rely more on spirits to learn about themselves, and or like have to do weird things like turn to the other changing breeds. And also, like, the threat of Pentex isn't going to seem quite as imminent to them, because there's not this active ongoing thing against them. Pentex has also been given 20 years of breathing room, and I personally have a thing where there should be like a Pentex green, where Pentex is making a big show of like wanting to have Pentex windmills and Pentex biofuels and all that kind of stuff, and making sure that Pentex is doing things to watch their carbon footprint and all the weird and twisted ways that you can turn that around. Mage the Ascension, the revised edition, can pretty much be used as writ in this version. Like, you can basically just say, like, it was the older mages in the far horizon are the ones that ascended and were able to actually comprehend the 10th sphere, and that your casual lower initiates to adepts that were on Earth, weren't still themselves ready for that kind of event. So they would still be left behind. You still have this kind of technocracy tradition kind of truce going on, because the technocracy is like still clearly won. If it weren't for their efforts, the human apathy wouldn't have allowed the paradox effect that saved the universe from being destroyed from occurring. And Nefandi, if you're going to be keeping Demon the Fallen in the setting, you probably want to tie their activities to whatever has evolved out of the infernal courts that have emerged in the years since these events 20 years ago. for the demon setting, but also though that gives you like the demon setting as presented in these books, like they had just barely gone on Earth, so they haven't really had time to really dig themselves in and establish themselves in any sort of power structure. Giving them a little like 20 years of breathing room kind of helps them become more established in the setting in a way. But obviously the Nefandi would be with them. You could still have Marauders. They would still function exactly the way they always have. Mage, for the most part, translates as writ. If anything I would change, it would be, like, in terms of some of the politics between the conventions and the traditions, I would argue that perhaps the virtual adepts have gone back over to the technocracy, and that now the ninth tradition has now been granted to the hollow ones, just kind of like got no one else. And so they've kind of been awkwardly assigned the correspondent sphere as the sphere they're supposed to represent, even though the hollow ones don't have any particular affinity for that sphere over any other. Like I said, they're kind of like, we got no one else, so I guess you're going to get this tradition seat because we're supposed to have 9 people on the council, kind of a thing. Changeling, I would say that, I would go with, like, most of Changeling's been erased. The winds of winter have come. That the only place that Changelings are still to be found on the world are, going back to the very original first edition of Changeling, I would put them in Haight-Ashbury. That's the last place where there's any glamour, just because of the weird nature of how San Francisco is. I would also use San Francisco as a vessel to still continue the plot lines that you find in San Francisco by night, so they can keep Kindred of the East involved in the vampire setting. Now, instead of going with 20th edition of Vampire, because of Gehenna, you have to have some way to have edited out some of the vampire bloodlines. So I'm going to instead do something that even I myself, like, I'm a little surprised when I decided to go ahead and kind of go with this, is to go ahead and use the 5th edition vampire version. And the fact that it doesn't include the Lasombra or Tzimisce or, Giovanni, followers of Set, Ravnos, all of that. Well, those are the clans that got wiped out by their elders. But because they followed the path of humanity, the Camarilla clans ended up coming through. Which means, like, well, all the baggage that comes with that, Malkavians, Tremere, all that kind of stuff, replacing factions like the Anarchs and the Sabbat in the setting. Well, you have a combination of both the continued expansion of the Kuei-Jin into foreign markets, kind of silhouetting the expansion of China into foreign markets over the decades since, to help give them expand a bit more of a foothold, especially in areas that were used to be under Sabbat or Anarch control, and so they can kind of slip in to fill that power vacuum that's missing in whatever vampire society is going on. Also, because of the Web of Faith thing, I would dare say that the various legacies that are found in Ebony Kingdom would probably also survive. That would mean that a few of them, while most of them would still, like, they're just gonna, like, they're sub-Saharan Africa, and that's where they like to be, and they're gonna stay there. I can see a few of them might start to kind of leak out and fill some of those voids in the same way that the Kuei-Jin are doing. The Zidundu are kind of a natural replacement for the Lasombra. You can use the Ventru and Malkavian colonial vampires from Africa could be returning back, and they could kind of take on the place of the anti-tribu Ventru and Malkavians that used to be amongst the Sabbat. Maybe the Ishtari going in to kind of take the lands that the Assamites used to control, and the followers of Set, because there's followers of Set in sub-Saharan Africa, they can kind of come back out and kind of replace the holdings that the followers of Set had already had, if not just an indication that the followers of Set were among the clans that also weren't destroyed because their progenitor doesn't hate them, kind of a thing. Also, I think it could be a fun twist that the Giovanni are still around, but it's not because the Giovanni are actually vampires. They're pretending that their clan survived, but it's actually their ghouls in the Mafia family that's attached to the Giovanni that have been maintaining the pretense of being vampires, and perhaps they're actually like low-key vampire hunters where, they have to kidnap lower, weaker, thin-blooded vampires or, minor 13th generation noobs who haven't established themselves or haven't got their powers up, and that way they can capture them and then use them to, keep their ghoul powers going on, because since their Giovanni masters were destroyed during Gehenna, they still want to maintain the power structure of the Giovanni Mafia, and they still want to, maintain their ghoul abilities, and how that allows them to maintain leverage over the regular mortal troops. And they're aware of vampires, so you could have this weird thing where like the Mafia is now secretly low-key actually like a major vampire hunter, while also pretending that they're still like servants of vampires or trying to masquerade as vampires. I think that could be an interesting twist to put in the what I'm calling the 30th anniversary revised World of Darkness so far. Anyway, I feel like that covers about everything. I'm going to leave Wraith out, because Wraith sucks. The whole Shadow thing was a bad idea. In concept, the idea of, like the duality of the spirit and all that, especially ties in with things like, Mummy. But I don't know. It's also just kind of designed to destroy your player group because of how the whole way they wanted the shadow to work and how other players are supposed to control your shadow. That's a terrible mistake. You should just have the game master control the shadow in the same way that the game master would control the Quajians, Poe, or like suggest most of the dark side stuff for the various World of Darkness characters that have dark sides to manage, and so on. So yeah, I guess that's about it in the summation of what I would do to repiece the World of Darkness together, not having to rely too much on buying the 20th anniversary materials. You can get a lot of previous edition stuff for a lot cheaper, and they're still perfectly valid and compatible. The most work there is to be done making things cross-compatible is incorporating 5th edition Vampire. But like I said, because of the fact that if you want to have Gehenna have happened, 5th edition kind of does that, since it leaves out all these other clans. As far as I'm aware, even like their new Sabbat book they put out, it's just talking about the anti-Tribu Camarilla clans, but it's not like presenting La Sombra or any of the others. I could be wrong. I haven't actually looked at it, but judging from the reviews I've seen, it seems to be the case. So anyway, I don't know. Anyway, that's it. Stay waspity to have a good one. All that normal shit, and goodbye.